Kia ora tātou. Nau mai hana mai to tonight's live stream kōrero series Arts and Climate Innovation. Ko Dolina Wehipeihana tōku ingoa no Ngāti Tukorehe me Ngāti Raukawa aho. Thank you so much for joining us this evening to this event hosted by Track Zero, PANNZ and Auckland Live. Our topic for discussion this evening is Mātauranga Māori and our future. I'm going to begin tonight's session with a karakia, me karakia tātou. Tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora ki te katoa, haumi e hui e, taiki e. And I'm very pleased to introduce my co-chair for this evening's panel, Sarah Meads from Track Zero. Kia ora, Sarah.
Kia ora. And a big welcome to those of you watching live on Facebook and YouTube. And thank you to those who may watch this later on recordings. We hope you're keeping well in level 2 around the country. Arts and Climate Innovation is a series of non-partisan live stream kōrero, bringing together speakers from the science, arts and creative communities to hear their perspectives on the powerful role arts can play in inspiring a fair carbon neutral future. This is our third kōrero, a series of 6 happening on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock, exploring a range of themes.
In tonight's panel, we discuss Mātauranga Māori and our future. Ko Ranginui, kei runga, ko Papatūānuku, kei raro, ko mātou e noho ana kei waenganui. With the sky above and the earth below, how do we live in the space between? Māori have developed cultural and artistic traditions that are unique to Aotearoa and provide opportunities for understanding and protecting our natural world and living together. Artistic expression and stories are inextricably linked to the world in which we live. And tonight we will discuss how these connections can help us to shape a better future.
So sharing their thoughts and insights this evening, our musician, composer and presenter Ria Hall, Earth Systems Scientist and Senior Lecturer in Māori Studies, University of Auckland, Dr. Daniel Hikuru, Carver Artist, Designer and Chair of Toi Ngāpuhi, Bernard Makarua, and Choreographer, Dancer and Video Artist Louise Potiki-Bryant. And we'd love to hear your comments and questions. You can send them in to us through the comments section on Facebook and YouTube, and we've got a team behind the scenes and they'll feed them through to us so that we can hear the panelists' comments back. Our first panelist is Ria Hall. So Ria is a musician, composer and presenter. Her work is deeply founded in traditionally Māori performing arts, having spent the best part of her decade with an iconic Te Waka Hue. In 2011, Ria released her debut EP that went to win multiple awards. And in 2017, her album Rules of Engagement, based on New Zealand wars in 1860s, debuted in the official New Zealand charts at #1. In 2018, she was awarded the Best Māori Female Artist at the Waiata Māori Music Awards and the prestigious Maioha Award for Composition Excellence in Te Reo Māori with her powerful performance of Te Aka Kai Po at the Upra Silver Scrolls. Earlier this year, she released Manawa Wera in response to the global political climate. And I think Ria said about that there are songs of hope, faith and love that should resonate across the world and with everybody. So welcome, Ria.
A tēnā koutou katoa, te hunga e tūhono ki tēnei kaupapa tātou, e mihi ana kia koutou, o tira ia, e mihi ana ki te kāhui pai I tēnei pō, tēnā koutou e aku whatukura, o tira ia e aku maraikura, tēnā koutou, tēnā hoki tātou katoa, ako waia hau, ko Ria Hall tōku ingoa, heuri tēnei no tauranga moana, Kai tauranga moana tonu a hau e noho ana, no Ngāi Te Rangi, Ngāti Ranginui me Ngāti Pukenga. He kai waiata, he kai puoro, he tutu, he tutu a hau, I roto I tēnei mea te ao toi. Nā reira, e mihi ana ki te kaupapa I whakakotahi ai tātou I tēnei ahiahi pō. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Kia ora everybody, my name is Ria Hall. It's so wonderful to be here amongst such esteemed company. I'm feeling somewhat unsure as to why I've been given the call, but nevertheless, it's very much an honour and a privilege to be here speaking to a kaupapa as such, which for the most part actually is something that we do as artists. We breathe in, we breathe out our taiao, particularly from a Mātauranga Māori perspective. I don't think I would be able to do what I do without seeing through that lens. That's the only lens that my art and my creating proceeds from. And I'm sure my fellow panelists will speak to and think very much from the same vernacular. So, kare tēnei, te kakao tēnei paipai e roa ana. So, yes, that's me. And I look forward to this wānanga and this talanoa and seeing how we can vibe and ad-lib off each other. So I'm looking forward to the learnings. Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora, Ria, thank you. I think that's actually also what you say there about breathing in and breathing out with taiao. We know that breath is such an important kaupapa that's come up over the course of COVID. In fact, with the COVID-19 itself affecting people's breathing, and then also with the Black Lives Matter movement and I Can't Breathe being the call phrase and the catchphrase for the terrible experiences that people have been suffering there. And it's all kind of interrelated, we're finding in the conversations that we're having about the environment and what's happening in the world with the pandemic at the moment. So thank you. We look forward to having a kōrero with you this evening as we get into our panel. I would also now like to introduce our second panelist for this evening, Dr. Daniel Hikuroa. Daniel is an Earth Systems scientist and senior lecturer in Māori Studies at the University of Auckland. He integrates Mātauranga Māori and science to realise the dreams and aspirations of the communities he works with. He is an established world expert on integrating Indigenous knowledge and science and has undertaken many projects, including co-writing iwi environmental management plans, hazard and vulnerability assessments. Daniel is the Co-Deputy Director, Public Engagement and Principal Investigator at Te Pūnaha Matatini and Principal Investigator at Ngā Pai or Te Maramatanga. Daniel also serves on the Statutory Māori Advisory Board for the Environmental Protection Authority, Environmental Advisory Group for Water Care, and as a Science Advisor for Foundation North. Kia ora, Daniel, welcome.
Kia ora Dolina, koutou mā, ngā mihi o te pō a kia koutou katoa, ngā mihi I runga I nei wā, wara wara I nei wā, huri huri. Kia ora.
Daniel, would you like to share some of your thoughts this evening with regards to what you've been working on in the science around climate change?
Aye, and so what I think I bring and why I might have been invited to this panel this evening is a background in geology. I have a PhD in geology. I did a postdoctoral research in climate change in the ancient past, so I have a useful understanding of the science behind climate change. And then I've also been very fortunate to have embarked on a journey of discovery in Te Ao Māori hoki, and in particular Mātauranga regarding many things, including what we change. And where I've found myself playing a key role for many of those groups is my ability to understand the nature of science and to understand the nature of Mātauranga so that we can weave those two things together. Because for many years, and in fact, in some people's minds, those two things are incompatible. And I very much disagree with that. There are some differences that are critical, but there is a lot of overlap also. And I think, we're finding ourselves in a crisis right now. And as responsible members of society and people with the knowledge and the understanding, it's important that we seek all the knowledge that's available and so that we seek from Mātauranga and we seek from the sciences so that we can better understand the effects of climate change, what's driving climate change, so that we might be able to make some better decisions. And I think what I would add in the small introduction piece is that increasingly the science community is coming to understand that Mātauranga is an amazing, vast, detailed, beautiful body and trove of knowledge. But it's not just there for the taking by anyone, and it's important that really good relationships and the mana and the integrity of Mātauranga is not compromised while we seek to try and find ways to make better decisions, to do things differently, or to do things the way we used to do, perhaps, as we move forward to tackle these issues that we face.
Thank you, Daniel. I think the concept of weaving together has come up on some of the previous korero as well, and that that deep treasure trove of Indigenous knowledge that can be coupled with more Western science, but also the respect that needs to go with and honouring of that go with exploring into both of those and harnessing both. So thank you, and it's lovely to have you part of this korero. I'd like to welcome our next panellist, Louise Potiki-Bryant. So Louise is a Kai Tahu, choreographer, dancer and video artist. She's a founding member of a Te Māori dance company for whom she has choreographed 6 award-winning works. Louise has choreographed for companies like the New Zealand Dance Company, Black Grace Dance Company, and Oro Tukari, Art, Story and Motion. A major influence in Louise's practice is an 8-year collaboration with researcher and composer Dr. Charles Royal, with whom she began the development of the dance practice called Whakahoa Dance. In 2014, Louise was the Caroline Plummer Fellow in Community Dance at the University of Otago. And then in 2019, she was awarded an Arts Foundation laureate for her choreographic and dance practice. So welcome, Louise. Lovely to have you.
Ora. O tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi ana hau ki a Dolina, korua ko Sarah. E mihi ana hau ki a Daniel koutou ko Ria ko Daniel hoki. E mihi ana hau ki a koutou ngā kai whakarongo. I te taha o tōku mātua, ko he uria hau o Kai Tahu whānui, ko puke kura te mauka, ko te tai o tākau te wai, ko muau poko te whenua, ko o tākau te marae, ko Kai Tahu whānui te iwi, ko Kai Turua hiki hiki me Kāti Tauka o Kuhapu, ko Louise Potiki-Bryant ahau. He kai kani ahau, he ringatoi o te ātata hoki, he ringatoi o te video artist. So my mode of expression is through dance and movement and moving image. So I guess it's all about the movement for me in many ways. And in recent times, the movement of water has become a huge inspiration for me. I just thought I'd speak a little bit about my practice in relation to the kaupapa for this evening. Going back just over the years, I've always been inspired to create works about our relationship with the natural world, with Te Taiao. And as Sarah spoke about, the collaboration with Dr. Te Ahu Karamu, Charles Royal, has really deepened my practice in that respect, through his guidance and through his sharing of his research in relation to the whare tapere, the pa-based houses of entertainment. And in sharing his research into the haka of the whare tapere and our relationship, which express our relationship with Te Taiao, it really helped deepen my practice in that way. For example, his sharing of his knowledge around hine ruhi tāne rore, our atua of dance, hine ruhi being the dance, the light which dances on the early morning dew. So yes, he really helped deepen my practice in that way. I've always been interested in pūrākau and how they can help guide us into our huri-huri. I've been particularly interested in atua wahine and in creating works which honour mana wahine. So, for example, a recent work with Atamira Dance Company was Onepu, which is a collaboration with Ariana Tikau. And that was really an expression of a Kai Tahu pūrākau as expressed by one of our rakatira, Tione Tare Tikau. And in collaboration with Ariana, who's a great-great-granddaughter of Tione Tare Tikau, we created a work about 6 atua wahine who stand at the different points on this sandbank called Piko Piko I Whiti. And each of these wahine have the enormous power of controlling and releasing the winds, the principal winds of the world. And they each hold a tāwhiriwhiri, a fan controlling the winds. And I really wanted to bring that pūrākau to the stage. And the work was really a meditation on the different qualities brought to us on the winds of each of these atua wahine. So that's a recent work exploring pūrākau. Over the years, I've become really interested in devising dance as an expression of whakapapa. For example, working with Kaiārahi Māori Cornell, we devised 2 works together, which have been ongoing. One of the works is Kiri, another one Kiri Wai. And in the creation of that work, we were really guided by the whakapapa of uku, of clay. And Pairo really helped me to understand the whakapapa of uku and the geological formation of clay. And the work really explores that, the creation of clay over time, over millennia. And from working with Pairo, I became more and more interested in the movement of water and the intricate relationship between earth and water in the creation of clay and of uku. And from that exploration, really I became interested in the movement of water within the tinana as well as within Te Taiao. So, for example, thinking of the water kiriwai underneath the skin, the layer of water underneath the skin, which they have found to be another organ of the tinana. So just interested in the movement of water within the body, in the intricate relationship of the health of our water to the health of the water within us. And that really led me to this current collaboration that is being supported through Track Zero and also with some support from Creative New Zealand, working with Daniel, Dr. Daniel Hikuru, who's here with us tonight. So it's been a great honour to work with him. He's been really guiding us in this project. The project's called Te Taki o Te Ua in our Kai Tahu dialect, or would be Te Tangi o Te Ua. Working with Ariana Tikau, who I spoke about before, my husband Paddy Free, who's composing music, and Ariana composing waiata. The kaupapa for this project is really to develop an interdisciplinary performance and video installation addressing the impacts of climate change in the takiwā of Kai Tahu, specifically in the southern takiwā, and specifically looking at the projected variation in rainfall across the different regions. For example, higher rainfall in some areas, the West Coast, for example, could expect about 70% higher rainfall according to the Ngāi Tahu climate change strategy by the year 2100 and under the worst case scenario. And then there's increases in storm intensity and frequency, flooding, and other areas, of course, experiencing more drought. So these are some of the issues where we've been researching and looking into with our mahi. Also looking at the surrounding issues around the pollution of waterways is another aspect we're looking at. The video installation will premiere at the Festival of Colour in Wānaka, and the performance is still being devised. It's all still a work in progress. So the aims of the project are really for me to learn and also to bring awareness to others around the impacts of climate change, as I mentioned, particularly in relation to the water cycle and extreme weather patterns. And generally to encourage us to look after water. Our spiritual and our physical well-being, of course, is deeply connected to the well-being of water and land. If our water is healthy, then we are healthy and nourished. on the other hand, if our waterways are unhealthy, we are spiritually and physically unhealthy. Kei te ora te wai, kei te ora te whenua, kei te ora te tangata. So we've been lucky enough to be supported by Track Zero to have a wānaka to develop the performance. And through that wānaka, we've been speaking with Daniel and speaking with Mike Joy. I've had great kōrero with Daniel around how he works with Mātauranga Māori and his earth system science and in relation to climate change. And we've had some great kōrero around how we could embody that within the work. Mike Joy has been speaking with us around issues to do with the pollution of waterways and his knowledge around freshwater ecology, which he spoke to us about how he feels like ecology is similar to whakapapa in the way that it considers relationships and interconnectedness. So it was nice to find that connection there. The work itself will combine dance, waiata composed by Ariana, and soundscapes by Ariana and Paddy, including her tauka pōro and different recordings of rain, from light misty rain to full-on deluge and storms. And we'll be working with video and set design. So in our process, we're really guided by the whakapapa of rain and water, different atua of rain and water, Mātauranga Māori and pūrākau relating to climate. The Waitaha explorer Rākai Hotu, who dug the freshwater lakes into Waipounamu and named the different lakes of those takiwā. So those are the things we're guided by, in particular with whakapapa of water, water being a taonga, it is an integral part of our whakapapa. And whakapapa is a fundamental principle of te ao Māori. People and land are intricately woven together, and so that's different from the perspective of having dominion over resources. It's being intricately related to our whenua and our wai. So in our whakapapa, freshwater emerges during the separation of Rakinui, Rawako, Papatūānuku, and their mourning for one another is expressed, of course, through the rain, the teardrops of Rakinui and the mist, the size of Papatūānuku. So therefore the water cycle is intricately interwoven with their relationship, their constant exchange of mist and rain and their love for one another, which in turn nurtures us and all their children. So some of the atua we are being guided by in the work of Para Whenua Mea, the atua of fresh water on land flowing from the mountains to the sea. Hine Wai, who is the atua of light misty rain. Hine Pūkohurangi, the atua of mist. And so really we're creating 3 stages for the work. For the video installation, there's 3 separate videos, each looking at a different aspect of being in balance, then the drought and the storms. So the first one, Waikohu, is an expression of when things are in balance within the water cycle. And we're really, Ariana for this section has written a waiata around the aroha of Papatūānuku for Rakinui. And it's from, all of the works are from Papatūānuku's perspective. The second piece is around drought, and it's from Papatūānuku's perspective again. And Ariana has written a waiata from Papatūānuku's perspective, and she is thirsty. O where te hiowai. She's thirsty, and so she sings with a dry vocal, almost like what she called a vocal fry. And she uses the whakatauki relating to the heat of summer, wasting people and making them appear that their joints are swollen. So that's one of her starting points, is that whakatauki. The final piece is storm, and it's an expression of the intensity and frequency of the storms and the flooding that will occur in some takiwā. And Daniel really spoke to us about, in this relation to this mahi, around tāwhiri mātia, and he may want to speak around that. But we were speaking around how Papatūānuku is really trying to scream over the storms at us to take action around climate change and such. So those are the 3 sort of sections: mist, drought, and storms. And I've put together a little video clip. If we have time to show it, if we don't, that's fine. And from each of those video sections, with some of the soundscapes. So it's just a work in progress, little snippets of some of the video we've created so far, but there's a long way to go. And yeah, so it's a 2-minute little video. If you think we have time to show that, we could show that. Otherwise, we could move on.
Yeah, that would be great, Louise. We'll just get Edward to share that video with our viewers.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Louise. Thank you very much for sharing some thoughts and that beautiful video of your work in progress. It's really incredible to hear you talk about the levels and layers of thought and research that goes into your choreography. And I can say, as a dancer who has performed in work by you, including Onipu, the work that you and collaborated with Ariana Tikau on last year, was really amazing experience. So thanks, Louise. Look forward to sharing more kōrero with you this evening. But for now, I'd like to introduce our final panelist of the evening, Bernard Makuari. Bernard is a practicing artist and a designer with a deep knowledge of traditional wood carving. He's had many solo exhibitions over the last 30 years and has also been a collaborator with other creatives on a wide range of enterprises, including major building development projects in Auckland and the North. Bernard has won awards for his design work, and he's personally committed to the fields of tribal and cultural revitalisation. He spent over 30 years actively working on this for Te Runanga o Ngāti Whatua, Ngāpuhi, Te Rarawa and other iwi organisations. Bernard joined us on a panel earlier this year as a representative of the chair of Toi Ngāpuhi. He is one of 3 Ngāti Whatua representatives who has been on the Auckland Museum Taumata ao Iwi for nearly 20 years, and he's also been an active member of the Haerewa Committee with the Auckland Art Gallery. Kia ora, Bernard, welcome.
Ai. Tēnā koe e Dolina, ko rahi au ia koe. Tēnā noho ki koutou, e ngā taumata, hara mai tētahi āhua. E kemi au tētahi wāhi kōrero, hei timatanga māku. E kemi ana e hahau ana te whānau i a rata, hei poka poka i a tūi. Ka hore e kitea o mate noa atu I te awa I piko piko I whiti, mā te maranga mai ai, ko hiki nuku e te tauarangi. Whano mai te toki, haumi e, ui e, tai ki e. Ai, tēnā hoki koutou e ngā kai hakarongo, e ngā kai mātakitaki, tēnei ka mihi atu ki te kaupapa. Hau, no roto te tai toke rau, te tahi o kuwaiwai o roto ngā paru o te moana o kaipara, te tahi o kuwaiwai, no roto I te wahapū o hokianga hakapau krakia, hokianga, te hokianga nui a kupe. Hau no te tai hau auru, ngā tai e whakatūria e kupe ki te marowhara, te moana tā poko poko o tāwhaki. E noho au, I roto I te pewhairangi, I roto o hawe, waitangi ki tua whenua, te taha o te whānau o tōku hoa wahine, tōku hoa rangatira o Ngāpuhi. Nō reira tēnā koutou kia ora hui hui mai anō rā tātu katoa. I was just amazed by that short video. Got lost in it, Louise, ka mihi haramai tētahi ahua. I'd like to say once again, nice to see my whanaunga Daniel Hikuru, and of course e ko I roto tauranga moana e te whanaunga tēnā noho ki koe. You know, I've been thinking, listening to this kōrero tonight, and I've got to say I'm very pleased to be the chair of Ngāpuhi, Toi Ngāpuhi, but I've got to be very clear to say the Ngāpuhi in Toi Ngāpuhi is actually Ngāpuhi-nui-tonu. Ngāti Whatua ki tā maki makauru te tai whakararo, te tai whakarunga. Ko waenganui, ko Ngāpuhi, ko te raro ki te tai hauauri, ko Ngāti Kahu ki te tai marangai, ko te aupauri ki te hiku o te ika muri whenua. Tēnei ko Ngāpuhi-nui-tonu. I know most people think everything north of Auckland is Ngāpuhi. You have to come up here and learn about the nuances of that. But I don't have the kōrero of Toi Ngāpuhi with me tonight. One of the reasons for that is that I've only just brushed the sore chips out of my hair. I've been milling logs for a kaupapa for a hapu up here. And so I've been on the end of a chainsaw and communing with the outdoors, with a little bit of rain, sunshine, with 4 seasons in one day up here. And I was thinking really carefully while the saw was buzzing and chips are flying in the air. Today was the first day of that work, and so we had a little ritual. Those of us that are doing the work, we're all hapu people, and we had a little fire to burn the maramara tuatahi. And as far as Mātauranga Māori goes, you know, sometimes in this modern life, unless our lives are revolving constantly around those practices, the dedication to those practices. You know, I suppose I'm one that's lucky enough to be able to say that I was dedicated to tāne, and I'd have no conflict and tension within myself to say I'm happily baptized as a Roman Catholic. There's no tension. I can live very comfortably in both understandings of God and environment and self. But, you know, in doing the maramara tuatahi, the little fire, burn the first chips, ritually, you know, not just make a fire and throw on some wood chips. You know, you have to You have to do that with dedication. You have to think about what that means. And I began to think that I'm lucky that English is my first language, but in order to learn a lot of the things that I wanted to learn, which is not about how to use a chisel or a chainsaw for that matter, but how to understand, to put my whole essence and thinking into a previous time and into the culture. And language is important. And the translation of some terms, even the term atua, the translation of that from Māori, the word atua, into how you would describe it to someone who doesn't speak Māori, it takes a bit of thinking, because is it a god or is it an atua? Of course, it's an atua, because that's why our ancestors created that appreciation. But now we live in a world where we can choose toi and we can choose art. How do we do that? That was one of the things. I had earmuffs on today, and there's wood chips flying around and the smell of two-strokers in the air. That's what I was thinking about. And luckily, I have all fingers. I never had an injury. But the challenge that we got is that in my father's time, and definitely in my grandfather's time, they were challenged. They were actually more than challenged. They were disadvantaged by their ability to think within Te Ao Māori. Now we're in a time now where we still got the challenge, but we've got to try and reconcile it. How do we live in a world where more or less our language is going to be English? And how do we reconcile our identity, what we've been dedicated to, whether that's a ritual dedication or whether it's something that we've chosen to do as an individual? How do we reconcile that? I don't think there's any one answer. Of course, we have to look at that ourselves, and the understanding, the appreciation of our hapu-ness and our iwi-ness means that there isn't, the idea of Māoridom is a misnomer. How do we reconcile that today? And we've got to take the opportunity, because instead of things being suppressed like they were in my parents' generation and in my grandparents' generation, we're being invited to come forward. So how do we do that? We've got to look really carefully. I was taught really from a really young age that as a carver, my most important tools are not a chisel or an axe or a chainsaw. My most important tools are my ability to remember. So that means in order to remember, I have to close my mouth and open my ears to be able to listen. Hakarongo, te tuatahi. So that means we have to think about remembering, being in a situation where we can listen to things that are worth remembering. Sometimes we can't judge what that worth is, but we have, I suppose, the challenge to look at how we remember. Because once we remember, then we can apply that remembrance or those remembrances at different times from then on. That once that memory is set, then that can reoccur in different ways. The next important tool is the ability to communicate. One thing to communicate in English, everything around our world is communicated in English, but more and more we're seeing that Māori language is being encouraged. More and more I'm able to converse in Māori at a confident and important level with people who aren't Māori. And so the ability to communicate is actually one of the most important tools to being a carver, because your communication has to happen with your understanding of what you remember and what you consider to be important. The last thing I wanted to say tonight, as I was thinking today, was when you work, you have all these people that you remember. where you remember how to, if I do this, this is going to happen, so I won't do that, all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that that I was thinking about today was a remembrance, and I heard my relative Te Hukarumu's name mentioned, and of course he was dedicated to his uncle, the Reverend Māori Marston. So I've got to bring up Uncle Māori to in this talk about Mātauranga Māori and the environment. Now, one thing, firstly, he was introduced this way of thinking. And when you think about it, the time that he was introducing this in the 70s and 80s and up until his death and after that, he introduced things like, instead of thinking about organizations, we should consider groups of people being organisms. That was one of his big things. Another of the things that confused the heck out of people like me when we were listening to him speak, but make a lot of sense now, is Ngā Kete o Te Wānanga. We kind of rattle them off now, you know, te kete tuauri, te kete tuatea, te kete arono. Well, his thinking was, what is that about? What is the three kete about? And of course, everyone's got an interpretation, but the interpretations that I use, like in thinking about today, is in the work that I was doing with the tōtara log that I was working with, kete aronui, the knowledge of observation, how to observe things, how to understand what you're looking at, te kete aronui. Te kete tuauri is sometimes considered to be the spooky one, you know. But actually, kete tuauri is about being prayerful. Being prayerful is, you know, how many times do we do things that we just go in it, it's a task, we complete the task and we don't think anything about it. But if we consider the commencement of the task in a prayerful consideration, whatever that means, not making any judgments, and I'm not defining that, but being prayerful, that means understanding that there is a power greater than our humanness. And then commencing and then completing that within a prayerful kind of understanding. Kete tuauri. Kete tuatea, the knowledge of working with people. The people that you consider colleagues, the people with whom you have to relate, your relatives. You know, that famous saying, yeah, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your relatives. You know, how do you work with people? How do you work with your hapu? How do you work with people who are not your hapu, your manuhiri? That's actually a knowledge. You know, we can follow some blueprints of protocols and that sort of thing. But actually, the knowledge of working with people is something that's really taken for granted and underestimated, I think. And of course, all of those knowledges can be guided by people who know more than you do. You just have to seek those ones out and then hope like heck that they will respond to your questions. Hoi no tēnei māku, ka mihi atu kia tātou, kia tau ngā manaakitanga ki waenganui kia tātou. I'm really keen to see where our discussions lead us this evening, and I'm very grateful for the invitation amongst our panel tonight. Nō reira, tēnā koutou huri huri no tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koe, Bernard. Thank you so much for that rich and amazing kōrero, of which I have jotted down many points, which I'm sure I will come back to and think about again. I love the concept of organisms, not organizations, ngā kete o te wānui, and also what you've pointed out at the start of your kōrero there about the interconnectedness between te reo and tikanga and Mātauranga Māori. And I just wanted to come over to have a question for Ria to kick off our conversation tonight. And just a reminder to anybody who's watching tonight, if you do have a question, just pop it in the comments and they'll come through to us and we can ask our panelists. We've had some miharos, kia oras, and tēnā koes from people watching tonight to all of you. So that's great. We've got some people out there that will might like to join our conversation. So Ria, I just wanted to come back to you to talk a bit about your practice as a songwriter and a singer, and the things that you choose to communicate about. You talked about that being part of the taiao was just part and parcel of the way you work. So I'd love for you to share some more about your process as an artist.
Yeah, kia ora, Dolina. Yes, as a composer, as a performer, and as someone who, for want of a better word, an artivist, I suppose you could say, I realised very quickly after reading what our kaupapa kōrero was for this evening, I was like, well, actually, if I have a look at the catalogue of my own work, 99.9% of my work has actually been surrounded and focused on things to do with our taiao, whether that be the whenua, whether that be our waterways, whether it be, coming back to us, the retention of culture, language, even the act of te whakawhānau pepe, so giving birth. So all of those things that are so natural to us as Māori. So that's where my inspiration comes from. I suppose in terms of the taiao, I'm thinking about as well drawing strength and drawing inspiration from my surroundings here. And if we look into our own narratives in our whānau hapu and iwi, when you introduce yourself as a Māori, you're starting with your waterways, you're starting with your maunga, you're starting, with the significant landmarks that in someone's head, when they hear those words, they can imagine those landmarks appearing in their minds, and they know exactly where you're from. So just all of those kinds of nuances of our culture are all inextricably linked to our taiao, and so is the way that I compose and the way that I view the composition process. And so I thank this kaupapa for actually making me realise and thinking about my own mahi, and just acknowledging that our surroundings, our environment, as an artist and as an Indigenous artist, it's obviously been and is the most natural place to create from.
Kia ora, thank you, Ria. As an artivist, there's no escaping from the content of many of your waiata and the struggle and the resistance that Māori have had to enact across this time of colonisation. And Louise, you also touched about that when you were talking about the difference of the Māori perspective on the taiao, that it's not about having domain over our resources, but being part of that. So I wanted to come to you, Daniel, just to ask for your perspective on a Māori worldview on the environment from a scientific perspective.
Yeah, well, those are two different things. And I've just been kind of jotting down here, as a scientist, I was trained to learn about the earth, about Papatūānuku me ona ori. But as I've grown to learn more about Mātauranga, we actually learn from Papatūānuku me ona ori. We don't learn about, we learn from. And I think that's probably a critical difference from my science practice to my my growing Mātauranga practice, where in science you're trained that you're the agent of discovery, that that you are the discoverer of knowledge. Well, in a Māori worldview, that's nonsense. The knowledge is out there, and when you get yourself in the right frame of mind and you prepare yourself, it will reveal itself to you at the appropriate time. Sometimes you've got to do mahi ahead of the times. You karakia, I tono to Bernard's kōrero there. You prepare yourself in the right way, and that knowledge, which was already there, will reveal itself to you at the right time. So that's what I bring to my practice, and I'm quite comfortable kind of switching between those and being able to probe into that way of doing things and probe into. However, for the challenge that we face, I think I'm going to be delving more into my taha Māori, into our Mātauranga Māori there, because that in the science practice, there is an assumption and an attempt to abstract oneself away from everything else, and so that you study everything, it becomes an object. And I think that sense of relationship that was so strong in Te Ao Māori and in the Te Ao Marama view of the world, and the Te Ao Marama is, of course, acknowledging the magnificent work of Māori Marsden, is that a Māori view is relational things. Knowledge is belonging. And it's not about power, it's about how do we better understand our relationship with Papatūānuku me ona ori, so that we can make better, artivist, gee, I like that, that's a nice one. And so, my response to your question, Dolina, is, I have to compartmentalise my science brain and my taha Māori side, and I'm quite comfortable doing that. But I'm also very confident that, in the weaving, we can create something very strong and enduring. And I'm hoping something that, if we just drew from one body of knowledge in isolation, we wouldn't reach that strong point. And I'm hoping, that's why I'm really excited to be working on this panel tonight, for starters, and also working with Louise, that we can be thinking about solutions that are currently unimaginable, that we really engage with that relational way of being and draw from the science. But I think that more science needs to come into and be brought into with a Māori worldview.
I'd love to also hear, Daniel, what your experience has been like working with Louise, with artists and the way they express. What's that been like for you both?
Yeah, and I'll start that a little bit by saying how thrilled I was to receive the tono from Louise to work with her on a number of levels. The first level is that as a scientist who works at a university, and therefore effectively I'm a beneficiary of society, I feel an immense responsibility to communicate the work that I do. And I recognise that in a science framing, there are some set ways that we communicate that work, but communicating to that community alone is not enough. That is not all of New Zealand. And so I was really selfishly excited to be able to work with Louise in particular, because it meant that I could be working with her. And so therefore the information we generate and the new discoveries we might find are drawing from that ancient, those taonga tukuiho that have been passed down, and weaving it with the science, would be fulfilling a deeply felt responsibility that I hold and that I feel very strongly about. And then the experience of working with Louise Raniana and Paddy has been just so wonderful, because a lot of the language that I'm not allowed to use in my science is exactly the type of language. I can talk about how I feel. I can talk about how I get hoha with this, and I get ready with that, and I get delighted with this, and I fall in love with that. And I think that's what's probably missing from the science. I try and push the boundaries here and there, but I don't have to. There are no boundaries for that type of language when I'm working with Louise and the team there. And to be honest, I see, I'm just amazed at how we come together, we wānanga, and I kind of fire out some things and some thoughts that come to me, and then they take those away, and then they come back with that video that we saw before. That moves people. None of my science moves anyway. Well, maybe some policy folks, but that's why I'm super excited, Sarah.
And over to you, Louise. What have you found working? I know that when you do develop something new, you're very, very rigorous with your research. And a lot of people don't understand or appreciate just how much artists do put research and development into their creations. How have you found the experience of working with scientists in your latest piece?
Kia ora, Sarah. It's been amazing to work with Daniel, and just to have the rich kōrero that we have, and just feeding into the mahi, and just to have the ongoing tautoko and feeling like we're supported on all sides, but just the weaving of what Daniel brings to our kaupapa with our artistic practice is really exciting. And I've never worked with scientists before. This is my first time with that, and I feel like I'm learning a lot, and on all levels learning a lot. And it's exciting to see the art practice and the science practice and Mātauranga Māori and coming together in this process, working with Ariana over Zoom and with Daniel over Zoom and our kōrero. It's going to be exciting when we come together for our wānaka coming up, and coming into the same room together and sharing with Daniel and with each other where we're at. We had to postpone some of our mahi together due to alert level 3, but it's coming back. We're coming back together in October. Yeah, so no, it's been very enriching on all levels, and the research comes from all places, from Ariana's her research through her waiata, and Paddy's research through listening to the sound of rain, and then embodying it in the body through what I'm doing, and then how you translate that into video has all been an interesting process. Yeah, so it's ongoing, and I'm looking forward to where we get to. It never ends really with art practice. It never gets to an end. You just sort of stop somewhere, and then this is what we're presenting. But the ongoing mahi that continues. Yeah.
I've got a question for each of you, just in terms of what you think Mātauranga Māori can offer, either the scientists or just all of us or any of us, in relation to the climate change crisis which we're all facing. So maybe I'll start with you, Daniel.
Ka pai. Yeah, so climate change is happening. Another thing I'm working on right now is with the latest Our Atmosphere and Climate Report with the Ministry for the Environment, and you know, climate, which is collectively a pattern of temperature, rain, wind, sunshine, storms, you know, all those together make up climate. And we tend to measure it, and people want to know, how much has the temperature increased? How much has the sea level rise? And you know, so it's increased by about 1.1 degrees Celsius since 1909. Sea level rise is variable around the country because we have things called earthquakes, and so the land is kind of shifting around as much as the sea level is shifting around. But it's definitely on the rise. And what Mātauranga brings us are different understandings of the manifestations of that climate change. And so in particular, our maramataka practitioners have been noticing changes for some time now. And, you know, and they don't notice things in terms of a degree Celsius or part of a degree Celsius. They would probably notice differences in rain patterns. They would notice differences in temperature, but often it's manifest in things in these tohu like flowers or trees or plants flowering unseasonally early. And so, or noticing the fisher folk, the fishing practitioners would notice that these things are happening at different times. And so the maramataka, of course, being the stellar lunar ecological calendar that was effectively what governed is too strong a word, but Māori life was built around the maramataka. It was the chronometer, it was the timekeeper, being the lunar nights. The stellar part of it was, of course, the different months. Every month was marked by a different star. And then it was an ecological calendar, because within each marama, within each month, it had predictions around what type of things would be better to do. And then in the different seasons, there would be also different activities. And one of the things I think with science and Mātauranga differ is, you know, I heard on the news yesterday, winter didn't get told it was spring because it was snowing down south. Now, the notion that you would impose a season at an arbitrary date onto natural variations and fluctuations was just a nonsense to Māori. You know, spring comes when spring comes. That season happens when you get the triangulation of tohu ki te rangi, tohu ki te whenua, tohu ki te moana. You get the sign in the sky, you get the sign in the oceans, you get the sign on the land. And then your season is there. And so Mātauranga has a lot to offer the climate change and understanding climate change. There's also another aspect, and I don't want to dominate this conversation for too much longer. Where it begins to impact on society is where we're seeing those increased storm frequency and magnitude, where we're getting increased storminess at the coasts coinciding with sea level rise. We're going to start to see some impacts on the land and some impacts on infrastructure that's there. And the pūrākau, e pāna ngā taniwha I reira, they're going to be the first places where you start to see the serious impacts of climate change occurring. Now, that's not talking in the language of science, but it's giving us just as accurate and a precise indicator of where things are going to be happening than anything else.
Kia ora, thank you, Daniel. That's beautiful kōrero. And just wanted to share a comment from one of our viewers who said, thank you for this rich kōrero tonight. We are an ecology of fellow sapiens finding our way together. And as an observant Pākehā, I am ever grateful for the gifts of Māori wisdom. I'm hungry for it and I am listening. I wholeheartedly believe that art and science are two sides of the same coin. Kia ora whānau.
Anna.
So does anybody else want to share a thought about what Mātauranga Māori might offer for us? Otherwise, I have another question. Maybe I'll proceed with my next question, which actually, thank you for the person who commented. And I wanted to talk about sharing Mātauranga Māori knowledge with our Pākehā friends and with the world. Daniel, in your kōrero earlier, you talked about the need to uphold the mana and the integrity, I guess, of the knowledge. And Bernard, in your kōrero, you sort of talked a little bit about how Māori are needing to actually reconnect in order to learn that knowledge themselves. And so I just have a question about learning the knowledge. How and where do you find the knowledge? Maybe I'll start with you, Bernard, if you've got any thoughts around, if you were going to tell someone where to start, how you might suggest that they might start.
That's the big question, isn't it? I'd like to come at a different angle just for a moment and say that one of the whakapapa of creations is a whakapapa which isn't a whakapapa of a living creature, a human or an animal. It's actually the whakapapa of the plant. And, you know, so why is that? Why is the blueprint, the formula for whakapapa of creation based upon the plants? I don't have the answers to that, but that's kind of what we're beginning to recognize, is unpacking that. Instead of saying, right, it's the formula of creation based upon plants because this, you know, if that was the case, people would go just to the end answer. But actually, the process of learning is what's important. And Daniel, you know, talking about maramataka, I'm lucky to live in one leg in the kaipara and one in Hokianga. And so we still have the heritage seeds that we're given, the peru and the tupu kumara. So the maramataka isn't an end point. Maramataka is a beginning point, so that you have a look at things and then you begin to be a part of your environment. Get the soil underneath your fingernails. Observe what's happening around you based upon what the observations were in the past. So the maramataka is a starting point, not an end point. So what we've got to do is we've got to do a mixture of what I was saying before, I suppose, which is the different knowledges. We have to learn again. We have to teach each other. We have to teach our children. We have to teach our relatives. In some cases, we might even have to be in a respectful place of helping to teach some of our elders. You know, that's our world is so topsy-turvy. You talk about plants coming early, Daniel. I had blackberries 2 weeks ago, turning black on the plant. This is in September, you know, August, September. That's unheard of, you know. So sometimes we're going to actually have to say, well, we're observing things, and that might be the way it used to be, dad or uncle or auntie, but we have to actually get down to some new learning. The knowledge of observation. You know, you can only observe by being out there amongst it. So get amongst it with your understanding of what is your ancestral connection to a body of water or a piece of dirt or a landmark of some sort. Working with other people. Learn to work with other people. Get advice about how to work with other people, your relatives, other people who have more knowledge than you, other people who have different sorts of knowledge, the knowledge of working with people, and being prayerful, understanding that we're this big in the whole creation, and that there is powers that are bigger than us, and that in order to be humble amongst that, we have to be prayerful. So I suppose that's how I'd answer your question, Dolina. Tēnā koutou.
Wonderful, thank you. Ria, I'll come to you next. If you've got any thoughts or responses to that idea of, I love the get amongst it, Bernard, and the observation, and it not being an end point, it's a journey. Ria, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, tautoko a haunga kōrero ko kōrero tia. I support everything that's been said, obviously, but I just want to continue to touch on the relational aspect and the fact that that relationships are integral to acquiring any kind of knowledge. So I suppose if you are a non-Māori trying to acquire Māori knowledge of sorts, relationships are everything. Relationships in this instance are everything too. So I suppose it's about being able to miri your relationships. And for me, and I know for a lot of my other hoa waiata, Rob, Maisie, Troy, the knowledge that we have in terms of our practice is not for us. It's not for us to hold on to. So if I'm thinking about things from that perspective, yeah. And if I'm to impart any kind of knowledge upon someone that wants to learn that isn't of Māori stock, I would definitely say build your relationships. You know, I was talking earlier and it was noted just before by Bernard, you know, understanding your landmarks, those relationships that you have to your surroundings, which are part of the kind of foundation of looking at things from a Māori perspective. So I suppose it's kind of like flipping the script on what you already know. Pretty much just throw out what you know and come in with a blank canvas and be humble enough to learn, you know, and to get your mind blown. I think that's really, really important too. And just to go back to some of the kōrero that was happening before in terms of, you know, how the climate and climate change is impacting on us. I'm thinking about like my father, who was a hunter-gatherer, forager kind of a man, and thinking about some of our pakeke, our kaumatu, kuia kaumatu here in Tauranga Moana. So our wahapu, our harbour, used to be obviously full of kai. And so when I hear our kaumatu speaking or kind of chatting amongst themselves, they'll say things like, oh, well, they used to be in that spot, but they're no longer there anymore, so we can't go out there to get the flounder, we can't go there to get the patiki, or this pipi bed is no longer available to us, or these tuangi aren't there, or these titiko are no longer there. So although I don't understand the scientific knowledge like what I'm learning this evening from Daniel, I understand those nuances, because that's the Mātauranga that I heard and I have been exposed to in terms of understanding our climate and understanding the environment and having a relationship with the environment. So again, it's just all that relational stuff, all those relationships with your people, relationships with your whenua, with your moana, with your waterways. Era āhuatanga katoa, it's all one and the same.
Kia ora, Ria, thank you. I also love to reflect on both your arts practice and Bernard's arts practice and Louise as well, in terms of that journey that Bernard was talking about, that you've been able to explore your relationships with the environment and your arts colleagues through the practice of your art. And I wondered, Louise, if you could talk about how, from your perspective as a choreographer and video artist, utilising Mātauranga Māori within your work, what has that been like for you in your journey of 20, 25 years as an artist?
Yes, it has. It's been 20 years, hasn't it, Dolina, since we first started making work together with Atamira. Yeah, so it enriches, I guess well, I would say it enriches my life, and it's in a way all I really know how to do, in terms of just making work, being an artist, and listening and being present to taiao, is I guess the essence of my mahi. Is I love what Ria and Bernard both said in terms of relationships. For me, it is about, that's really key to art practice, as well as Mātauranga Māori, and that idea of coming in humble. I really love that whakaaro, and just being willing to learn and listen. And I guess in terms of art practice, I guess it's art and life together for me. It's sort of, there's no separation, yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, Dolina. Engari, that's really how I feel in terms of art practice, that it's kind of my whole life and there is no separation from, doing anything. It all feeds into the mahi, and for me, Mātauranga Māori has really been at the core of the kaupapa that I explore, and it's just really what I feel inspiration from. And yeah, every day I feel inspiration from our pūrākau, from just having deep kōrero, for example, with Daniel, with Ariana and others. Just feeds life and feeds art, and yeah, so I hope that answers your pātai, Dolina.
Louise, you might have actually started to answer a question someone's just sent in, and that is, can Mātauranga Māori be walked out and put into action without spiritual precepts and concepts of the primordial construct of the world we are always in? And they just wanted that to be put to any of you on the panel.
Maybe someone else might have an answer.
Anyone got a response to that question?
Yeah, I've got a perspective on that. So sitting on my shoulder, a bunch of these uncles and aunties that I've had the privilege of walking with in my life, and I remember one uncle who I miss dearly. He died some years ago, but he said to me one day, he said, just because you ask the question doesn't necessarily mean that you automatically deserve the answer. And I struggled with that for a wee while, because in our modern life, we are we're encouraged, we're pushed to ask the question, to hypothesize, and then to check it out. When you understand ngā kete o te wānanga, and you understand that actually before you ask a question, perhaps you should observe things. And perhaps before you ask something, you should seek some expertise. I remember working with a particular carver for some years for many years actually. And for about a year, he refused to talk to me. We'd be in the same carving shed. And I'd say something like, well, what's that chisel for? Or something like that. He just wouldn't answer me. And I realized after some time that actually he was demonstrating to me what my answer was. I had to get over myself and stop rushing to the answer and realize that actually he was showing me how to figure the answer out. So there's a couple of things about that. If you're going to ask a question around Mātauranga Māori and within Māori relationships, be really careful how you ask the question. Ensure that your relationship is strongly established first. I'm talking about the cup of tea kind of relationship, not the relationship as I've really want to do this study and you've got the information and I would really like to pick your brains. That generally for people who have Mātauranga Māori is going to be a really quick way to have a very unwordy conversation. So in order to do that, you have to be able to be in yourself. You have to be prayerful, in other words. And so a short answer to that question is there's no way to walk in Te Ao Māori with respect to Mātauranga Māori without having the appreciation of what it is to be prayerful. Like I said when I was began, I'm a baptized and confirmed Catholic. I have to say that, otherwise my relations from Hokianga will slap my ears next time they see me. But I'm also really dedicated and was dedicated and given the tohi, the privilege of being dedicated to tāne. I have no challenge with that. But you can't actually appreciate either without being able to be prayerful in both Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā. Hoi nā no tēnei māku. I hope I've put a cat amongst the pigeons and see what others have to say.
Thank you, Bernard. On that note, I think it's a wonderful time to finish and to say what a privilege it's been to be having a korero with panellists Ria, Bernard, Daniel and Louise. You've brought up a lot tonight and it's been a very rich discussion, so thank you so much. For those who couldn't join us, the recordings of the live streamed event will be available to view on both PANNZ and Track Zero Facebook and Auckland Live YouTube.
Just like to echo Sarah's words of a huge thank you to our beautiful panellists this evening. Thank you so much, and to all of you who have joined the conversation this evening and watching from home. Thank you. Also want to thank the team behind the scenes from Track Zero, PANNZ and Auckland Live, and also thank our supporters, the Royal Society and The Big Idea. Our online live stream, Kōrero Arts and Climate Action, will continue next Wednesday, the 9th of September, with the topic Climate Change or Culture Change. Please join us again next week. We will be speaking with script writer, poet, broadcaster and podcast producer Linda Chanwai-Earl, musician and composer Warren Maxwell, visual artist, curator and researcher and the head of school at Whiti Ōrehua School of Art, Massey University, Dr. Huhana Smith, and musician and composer Rob Ruha. So finally, to close our session today, I'll just end with a whakatauki. Toi tū te marae o tāne, toi tū te marae o Tangaroa, toi tū te iwi. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.